is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 1, Episode 3, Reconnoitering the Rim. In this episode, I watch with my face in my hands as a very stupid man falls very predictably to anyone else to his death. Also, I really like Wild Bill Hickok a lot more than I expected. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and many thanks to Patrick for commissioning this whole, first season, practically. Patrick is on that shit, guys, so if you ever want to say thanks to anybody for getting me to cover this, he's the guy. This episode was packed with so much, and when I start off saying about, how I like Wild Bill Hickok a lot more than I expected to, what I mean by that is mostly there are characters like him in a lot of stuff that are the strong silent type, for lack of better phrasing, who are the badass, but they are a little bit unavailable in terms of personal understanding. We don't get to know them necessarily the same way we get to know a lot of other characters, and so because of the fact, partially, I think, that they are not someone that we get to know really well, we admire them a lot more than we would other characters, or a lot more than we do other characters, because they are a bit of a mystery to us, and they are, I think, I don't want to say that it's a lazy kind of character, because I don't think that's fair, and I think that stories benefit a lot usually from having that kind of character included. But I just feel like it's really interesting how this show has decided it's going to give us some of Bill Hickok's less impressive moments, or at least show him being a little bit more vulnerable. Doesn't feel like the right word, but it's as close as I can think, so we'll go with that. And he just feels like a lot more of a real person than I ever expected, considering how things start off with him as just basically being a kind of celebrity. So yeah, I'm surprised at how much the show is attempting to sort of undercut his badass personality. And I don't mean undercut in that they're trying to make him less badass. I mean undercut in that they're really emphasizing that he's a person, Yeah, there's a lot of legend around him, basically. But that is because people talk, and that's how other folks have built him up. And not necessarily is that based in reality, beyond the fact that he has some clear skill. Excuse me, guys. So, all right, I'm going to start from the beginning of this episode here. We start off, I find it kind of interesting that so far, I don't think this show has had a cold open. It seems like it starts with the credits right away. But we start off with Ellsworth working on his gold claim, and Dority out there, pretending to wait for Brom. I mean, he is waiting for Brom because it hasn't been made clear that Brom is going to not show up. But I'm expecting that they all know that Brom is giving up. I have a cat here. Not the time, cat. So there's a sort of oh, I wonder where he is farce. But he knows where he is, and he knows that this is a guy who's he's I feel a couple ways about Brom. Let's talk about Brom real quick, because he ends up dead by the end of this episode. Spoiler alert, which, I mean, anybody could have seen coming, because this man is wildly out of his element and clearly thinks that having money and having a powerful daddy thousands of miles away is anything that's going to protect him, which is sort of precious. And it's very clear to me that his wife is a lot smarter than him. And I'm very curious what's going to go down with her now that she's out here all alone, because there is nary a man out here that I would trust with kind of taking guardianship of her. And in this era, a woman kind of has to have a man guarding her, because there's just, it's a free-for-all, basically. So, especially a woman who is, I don't want to say of noble birth, because that gives it a lot more, but obviously she's an upper-class woman. I feel like there could be plenty of people, if they weren't trying to hurt her, at least trying to rob her. But Brom, it's possible that things have progressed time-wise in a different way than I am interpreting it all, but I'm sort of taking each episode at face value in terms of it's been only a few days between each episode, right? It seems like Brom bought the gold claim and has been going and doing the prospecting like less than a week, easily less than a week. And he's already deciding that it's not worth anything. And I find it sort of like I said, sort of precious that he wants to hold Al accountable for selling him, what he claims is a useless piece of land, when, to be honest, he hasn't actually done much, due diligence. And so Al's proposal, which of course I knew immediately was just a pretense to murder him, but nevertheless, Al's pretense is something that would have been valid, except I guess Al does not believe that this gold claim is necessarily worth anything, because why would he sell it, right? I guess it's sort of a question for me. Does he believe that it's worth something, and is just kind of trying to get this pain in the ass out from under his feet, because he's already threatening to bring in the Pinkerton guards, or is he sure that it's not worth anything and just trying to fleece the guy, and as soon as the guy threatens to bring in anybody, is like, well, I can't have that? Because I wouldn't be surprised a bit if he didn't know whether the land was worth anything or not, and really didn't have any interest in putting in the effort to find out, and was just interested in getting whatever he could for that plot of land. That feels a lot more Al to me. Not caring either way, that's their affair, but I will figure out how to get what I can from it. And so it's sort of frustrating that this dude winds up dead when he would have been, if they properly reconnoitered the rim, he would have been like, oh shit, here's something. He didn't have to die. And yet it's an escalation on both parties' part that causes it to reach these drastic measures so quickly. So I find that kind of compelling, actually, that it's not a case of just Al being a bad guy and just killing this guy when the dude finds out that Al's doing something wrong. Yeah, that's part of it. But also, it's this dude who bought this piece of land expecting that in a week he's going to turn up with handfuls of gold nuggets, and then immediately getting pissed and stamping his feet and wanting his money back when that does not happen. And so I'm not going to say that he deserved to die. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that he is acting like a shit, and obviously is a spoiled brat who thinks things are going to come easily to him. And it's hard for me to have a lot of sympathy for him. I have a lot more sympathy for his wife, who's caught in the middle of this thing, who is a lot more aware than he is of the danger that he's in, and tries to convince him not to go through with this fucking stupid ass plan of going out and reconnoitering the rim in the middle of the fucking night with a man who works for the dude who he thinks swindled him in the first place. And she tries to convince him, like, you know, he goes and talks to, Brom does, he goes and talks to Wild Bill initially to try and, like, get Bill to handle the fact that he feels like he's been swindled, which predictably is not welcomed by Bill at all. Bill's just basically like, I don't know who you think I am, but that is not the kind of shit that I do. And he tries to sort of hedge it and be like, well, I didn't say how you should handle it. And Bill's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that you did not mean that I should just have a conversation with the guy, right? And I felt so bad because Utter is there and is just like, hey, Brom, buddy, listen, I get that you're upset, but also I am sleeping in the room that previously was occupied by the dude who sold you this plot. And there's a huge fucking blood stain on the floor. So maybe you want to think about the fact that these guys are willing to kill somebody over God knows what. And Brom's just his smugness and his reaction, I take your point quite well. No honor among thieves. No honor among thieves is not the point. That guy, like, yeah, maybe he was in on it and maybe they're willing to turn on their own. That's not the point. The point is that they are willing to turn on anybody, and you are certainly not the fuck on their team. So you have even less protection than that guy had. You're not valuable to them. You gave them their money already. There's no reason for them to keep you alive. So yeah, he walks away, and it's just a funny moment of Bill being like, I don't think he took your point quite. And Charlie Utter being like, yeah, I don't think so quite either. It's just a hard thing to watch somebody walking into such a dangerous situation with this amazing arrogance and a real lack of understanding. Like, in some ways, Brom's got almost a modern understanding of what's going on here, in that we picture places that are, you know, inhabited by enough people as still being accountable to the rule of law. And we imagine that there is some sort of governing body that will, like, protect the innocent from criminals. And that's not how Deadwood is set up. Like, is there even an official sheriff in Deadwood? Is there anybody that's, like, supposed to be the police other than the road agents who are not in town? They're road agents. I don't think that there is even the semblance of law enforcement here right now. And yet Brom has this attitude. Like, he's so sure he's going to have backup. And even though he confesses to his wife in private, well, the Pinkertons aren't going to get involved unless Father gets involved. So he knows, in a sense, that the Pinkertons are not really an option, like, in his immediate future. He's still functioning as if that's an immediate proposition because he can use it to scare Al. As if Al isn't aware that that is not an immediate proposition himself. Al's been out here a lot longer than you. He knows what you can do and what you can't. And he is perfectly aware that if he makes it look like an accident, even if everybody in the fucking town knows he did it, there is nothing anyone is going to be able to do. You are already dead. End of story. And I think that's the thing, is it's sort of like, not to get too political here, but comparable to, like, when people expect that a cop is going to get in trouble for shooting somebody who's unarmed. And the cops are the ones who account for themselves. The cops are the ones that hold their own responsible if they do something like that. And me, 6-10 years ago, would have expected there to be consequences. But I didn't understand that they know they can just shake a finger at somebody and be like, don't do it again, and then wait, and people will let it go and forget about it, and that cop can rejoin the force, no problem. Because we expect there to be the same sort of consequences for police that there are for the rest of us. And that's because we are silly, naive people who don't understand how the system works. So we are, in a lot of cases, a lot like Brom, where we're like, well, but everybody knows there's camera footage that they did this. Doesn't matter. Unless you can find an authority that is higher up than they themselves are, and there is a system put in place with which to hold them accountable, there's nothing that anybody can really do about it. And that's what's so frustrating, is that the people who are in charge of creating that system are the ones who benefit from not having that system in place. Hence, it does not exist. So what's going on in Deadwood makes me really curious on whether or not there is any future for law enforcement here at all. Do people want that? How many people here are, quote, honest citizens who would welcome there being somebody to sort of like protect the place? And how many people here are just as big a crook or trying to be as big a crook as Al and love the fact that there is nobody to answer to? And that's why they're here. I feel like it's the latter is the majority. And that's part of why Deadwood is blowing up the way that it is. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about Brom immediately because so much of this episode has to do with him. And he even has this sort of weird interaction with Alma, his wife, where he's talking about how he had a headache one day and tried the medicine that she takes allegedly for her headaches, and that it didn't really do anything for him. And she says to him in this really like sweet, kind voice, perhaps the sexes experience the medicine differently. And he has an interesting reaction when she says that. He sort of turns away as if she has rebuked him. And it really makes me think that Alma is an exceptional actress and is always so soft-spoken and kind-hearted, but that he has gotten to know her well enough to see through that and tell when, despite her softness, she's saying something in a quasi-aggressive manner for her, relatively speaking. Because he just really turns away in a sense like that he feels like embarrassed almost to have brought this up at all, or embarrassed to have put her on the spot where she now has to explain herself. And I find that to be sort of telling in terms of their relationship. And can we just, I'm going to end my discussion of Brom quoting what I found to be such an embarrassing call. You guys, I was watching this on my headphones while Owen was in the room reading, and I just groaned and laughed so loud at one point that he stopped and was like, "Are you okay?" But the point where he says, "If I am stooped the next time you see me, it is not worry. It is not with worry, but with the weight of our recovered gold." And he says it with this fucking look on his face that is so self-serious. He really feels like he's saying something of significance here. This poor asshole. So yeah, he follows, what's his name out there, and gets cracked. He gets thrown off of the cliff. And then Dority goes down there, realizes that he is not entirely dead, and I think picks up a rock intending to bash him over the head with it, and then gets a look at it and is like, wait a second. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but there is nothing in the look of the rocks that Dority is, because he looks at the rock in his hand, he goes and checks the face of the cliff and then sort of winds up covering it up with leaves and stuff. He clearly can tell that there's gold here, but as a viewer, it's not clear to us that there's gold there, right? it's not until he winds up going and talking to Al that we realize exactly what was happening there. Because I was watching I've seen this episode twice now, and I was really watching the second time. I couldn't see anything. And I don't know if it's just my untrained eye or what. But yeah, he winds up smashing Brahm's whole head, really, into the rocks, and killing him because he doesn't fucking realize that Ellsworth is standing right over here watching through the trees. Now, Ellsworth seems pretty shocked, and I am surprised that he is surprised. I kind of thought Ellsworth had their number. And it seems like Ellsworth was not aware of what these people were. And on top of that, Ellsworth is witness to... The murder would be bad enough, but he's witness to Dority covering up the cliff face. So he has to, like, sense what that's about and why he's doing this. And that means that he could potentially have something to hold over their heads. I'm worried about Ellsworth. That's what this comes down to. I really like him as a character. He's one of the only people in this community who seems to be simultaneously a decent-hearted person, but also not a moron. And I don't want him to get caught up in this. However, I must confess that it would have been smarter of him if he had not followed them. So he did, in some ways, get himself into this mess because he should have just minded his own fucking business, which he did not do. So Ellsworth, just mind your own fucking business from here on. You have a better sense of who you're dealing with now than you did before, which you can use to your benefit because you know how to not wind up in trouble. Don't do anything stupid, dude, is what I'm saying. Just be cool. You know, just shh. You know? So we'll see how that goes down, but I am concerned for him. All right, so speaking of Swearengen and his whole deal, let's talk about him. Swearengen is really irritated because he finds out that there is somebody aiming to set up a saloon right across the fucking street from him. And it is really, like, bald-faced. Like, honestly, this is the sort of shit that I know you kind of need to be willing to do if you are a business owner, but it takes the kind of nerve that I just don't have, where he sees these people sailing in with their huge saloon sign, wagons filled with women, card tables piled up, booze, everything. And they have basically a party across the street as they set things up and get things rolling. All the while knowing that Swearengen is staring at them from out his window in his almost identical saloon directly across the street from them. That just takes so much balls, you know? It's just the kind of nerve that I'd be so concerned about something happening to me. I really, really would. And I can't speak highly enough for the man that Swearengen winds up yelling at one point, because it is super funny to me. He says to the guy, the dude who wound up, I think it's Simpson's the name of the guy, right? Who sells the location to these people. Simpson ain't no fool, man. He knows who Al is. And Al says something about how, like, it isn't fair that you didn't give me a chance to match their offer. And Simpson is like, why would I fucking do that? You couldn't have matched their offer, A, and B, because you couldn't match their offer, you'd have just killed me and taken it. So he's almost saying, Al, you have nobody but yourself to blame on this, because I had to do this on the sly since you are such a motherfucker. And then when he's like getting into his wagon to drive away, Al says something like, drive safe, cocksucker. And Simpson's like, oh, don't worry. I know your mind. I took precautions. And clearly has like a crew of people around him. So good on you, Simpson, for like making the deal that you need to make, getting the money, and not underestimating the fucking dude you're dealing with across the street. He knows. I'm wondering if there will be retribution for him at some point, but I'm not too worried about it. Mostly not too worried about it because I don't care about Simpson in particular, but not saying that I'm not worried about it because I don't think it's going to happen. It certainly may. I don't get the sense that Al Swearengen is a man who leaves off having a grudge against somebody. He definitely holds grudges. So yeah, these people show up. I'm trying to remember what the name of this place is because it turns out in the end that Farnham is the one who was the go-between for these people to buy this place. And, you know, Swearengen is so angry at the fact that these people are setting up and somehow did this right under his nose, and he figures that there had to be some sort of go-between. But he can't figure out who it is and figures whoever it was is personally a traitor to him. When really, we know that Farnham just did this because he wanted one less hotel. The place across the street used to be a hotel. So if he can squeeze this area for room rates by there only being one place to stay, it's really good for his business. And he was not doing this in any way to undercut Swearengen. Now, it's a really interesting moment, actually, when he finally does tell Al this. I have to say, the way that he frames this, because he's getting questioned by Al really closely, who has started to get the sense from watching him go across the street and talk to these people. I was impressed with the way that Farnham said, short of burning everything down, you've got to trust somebody. Because that really does seem to drive... It seems to cause Al to sort of stop and take a step back. And realize, like, you know, as much as this fucker kind of betrayed me, he does have his own business to worry about, which I frequently seem to forget because we're in such cahoots all the time that I think of him as like my lackey. And I'm not saying that Al is realizing that Farnham is not his lackey. I think he's just realizing that Farnham has his own whole thing going on that Al never really takes into account. And you know, the question of you've got to trust somebody is a really good point, because Al can only go around shooting everybody in the head who betrays him for so long before he has run out of people who are willing to take a gamble on working with him in the first place. And I feel like that's something that a lot of criminals probably have to like cope with, is how far do you take retribution before you've made it that everybody who was working with you or for you is now, like, you know, contemplating an outright mutiny because they have gotten sick and tired of how you were willing to put everybody down for doing anything. So yeah, when Farnham says, short of burning everything down, you've got to trust somebody, Swearengen really stops and sort of looks at him like, oh shit, I guess you've got kind of a point. And he winds up turning Farnham around and being like, I want you to report back on me and on everything that's going on. Which it turns out was smart of him, because Al already had somebody who was meant to be watching over. The name of the place across the street is Bella Union, which I find to be kind of like a cumbersome name. I don't really like it. I mean, the Gem, Bella Union. Of course you're going to go to the Gem, you know, until you see them, maybe. Because Bella Union definitely has a nicer, like, vibe inside. But Al already had somebody that he had assigned to sort of keep an eye on Bella Union. And then we find out that the dude who's doing it is playing both sides. And he's going to be reporting whatever Bella Union's owners want him to report. So, yeah, he's not really, like, going to be super useful. And he's doing this because he's an addict and he's getting his fix from these guys. Which it turns out is opium. Not morphine exactly, right? At this point. I think it's like a more raw form, but similar. They call it dope. So I'm just going to call it dope. So yeah, this having Farnham be his like spy, I'm really curious whether or not they are going to be aware of what's going on there. Do they, because Farnham's not exactly a good liar. You know, he's not really like composed. He doesn't come up with like, what's the word I want? He's not glib, right? He doesn't come up with things on the fly. He is a stutterer. He repeats things back to you when he's nervous. So I can't help but wonder how well this is actually going to work out, because I feel like these guys are going to figure out that he's gotten found out by Swearengen and that he is now reporting to him. And I'm just sort of like, I don't like Farnham at all. But I also have a weird sort of protectiveness of him, just because I feel for anybody who is just trying to make it in this place and they are up against somebody like Swearengen who is as ruthless as he is. It's just, it's not a fair playing field, you know? And Farnham also has this run-in with Calamity Jane, where he is such an asshole to her. He doesn't want her staying in his hotel at all. I guess that this is because she is a single woman who is an alcoholic and tends to cause trouble. So being a woman and being alone right there is not great for business, right? And the fact that she kind of goes off, also not great. Also, she sort of made off in the middle of the night with somebody who was important to Swearengen. So there could be that aspect of it too, although that's not exactly clear. But Farnham is such a dick to her. He like does some like one of those once-overs before calling her ma'am, if I guess your sex correct, because she's not wearing a fucking gown. And I just don't have any patience for that sort of thing, because he's just doing this to cut her down. And she is well aware of it. But of course, as soon as Bill comes in and is like, she can stay in my room, it's fine, he fucking falls all over himself to be like, well, all right. He tries to argue for a second, but Bill keeps on challenging him on every point that he's trying to make until it's finally not really worth it for him to pursue the issue anymore, unless he wants to lose Bill's business. Because Bill is clearly like, he'll sleep in the hall outside the room rather than be in the, like, then go in and cause a disturbance. So obviously Bill would have no problem with not staying in the hotel at all. I think he'd be fine sleeping in a wagon if it came down to that. And then he'd be out, not only Bill, but the other room in which Charlie Utter is staying. So that scene is just really frustrating, because I feel for Jane, and she's trying to take care of this little girl whom she has grown very attached to. It's really cute, the scene where she's trying to talk to her and she can't stop swearing and she keeps saying, I owe you a penny. I owe you another fucking penny. I owe you another penny. Okay. And it becomes pretty clear in that scene. Jane has feelings for Bill. I don't know exactly how deep those feelings go, but it's at very least a big crush. She clearly admires the guy and respects him, wants everybody else to respect him, wants to be a bit of his protector as well, wants him to see her in a favorable light. And when she's talking to this little girl about, like, you know, this, that we may be sharing the bed, and that's just because that's the way the room is set up and that's all there is to it. And I'm like, sure, honey, whatever. I just, honestly, I don't see anything happening between her and Bill. Mostly because Bill does not seem interested in sex much, period. We only ever see him playing cards. In this episode, he helps with building the hardware store a little bit. Other than that, cards and sleeping and drinking is all he does. So there's all kinds of women around. He would probably be able to sleep with them for free if he played his cards right, art, because of who he is and getting his business here. But we don't see him pursuing anybody. And I feel like we don't have a good sense as an audience right now how long he has been hanging out with Jane in the first place. But I figure if something were going to happen between the two of them, it would have happened by now. So there's just a sort of hero worship thing going on there. And yeah, I'm not because it could be platonic. It could be. But the way that she talks about the two of them sleeping in the same bed, I don't think it is. And yeah, it's just sort of low-key adorable, to be honest, because she puts up such a tough front. And it's like eggshell. It's so thin. And the moment you push on it at all, it gives way. And she's just kind of a sweetie pie. And I just feel, I really enjoy her character a lot. Because they've decided to do something interesting with her. Instead of having her be a strong female character who's just basically Bill Hickok in a dress. They've given her a lot of layers, and they've given her vulnerability and weaknesses that are understandable and appropriate for the era, especially the fact that she is being treated this way by men and not taken seriously, and that there's a threat of rape that's hanging over her head sometimes that she seems very aware of because maybe she's experienced it already. I like the fact that they acknowledge all of that while still having her be so boisterous and hard-headed that she's going to be who she is anyway, because that still shows an incredible strength of character. So yeah, Jane is really fascinating to me. So coming to talk about Bill Hickok, fucking this dude, man. He is, it's the kind of thing that he's a weird type of celebrity. I really wonder what it's like to hang out with somebody who's medium famous. If you are enough of a superstar, you just get people falling all over themselves the moment that they see you. And it's all huge fans, people who have a passing knowledge of you, but they don't necessarily feel ownership over you. I feel there's something that happens when you're a medium celebrity where people feel more of an entitlement because they know that you don't have this worldwide or national following. And they feel well, I've been a fan of yours since before you started to hit it big. Or because you are a smaller level celebrity, you have a more intimate social media platform that is a little bit more responsive to people. And so they feel you are more of their friend. And in this episode, we see people coming up and talking to Bill in this way that's just so fucking frustrating. So we have this one dude who's playing cards against him. And this is Bill really starts to lose his temper. And he winds up putting up both his guns in a bet, and he wins. He's knows he's going to win, which is why he's doing this in the first place. But the guy he's playing against is so fucking arrogant and really excited to be in this position in the first place. It's tough to watch to me because he's drunk, first of all. And the way that he's lording it over this guy, he's not in danger. He's just taking it so much for granted that even if I totally crush you and insult you, you aren't going to do anything to me. it's hard to watch. So the guy who he's playing up against in this scene, I think, is Clay, if I'm not mistaken. Clay is the name of the actor. I'm using Amazon X-Ray here. It's the actor's name is Clay, and his character description is just loudmouth drunk in the gym. He doesn't even have a name. He is called Loudmouth Drunk in the Gym. That is hysterical. But yeah, I love the fact that he's like basically pushing Bill to make a pair of the gun, because Bill's going to put up one gun for his bet. And then this guy is like, well, maybe if you do two, it'll be worth my time. But, you know, in the end, it turns out that he has pretty much lost everything. And even when he loses, he says, well, that's one in a row for you, Wild Bill. He still can't let it go. This fucking idiot. He isn't dead yet, but it's only a matter of time. And Bill starts to go off on him like, that your mouth looks like the hood on a cunt to me, Jack. When you talk, it looks like a cunt is talking to me, Jack. Like, he just starts to like go off, and it's pretty scary. He finally says, you'll still run your cunt mouth to me, but I will take it in order to play poker. That's how much he loves this game. That he will deal with it. But damn, he is real scary in that moment. Like, this guy, you can tell, really feels a way about how he was just talked to. I don't like it. Bill Hickok is well cast. He's a scary guy. Even though it doesn't seem like he's, you know, out here willy-nilly. He's not somebody looking for trouble the way that I feel like Jane low-key looks for trouble. But he is very intimidating. So later on, because bless his stupid heart, Charlie Utter really wants Bill to be friends with Seth and Saul. He thinks that they're a good influence, and he like really wants to be buds. So he sets up that they're all going to go to dinner that night. But then Seth and Saul wind up being able to close on getting their lot from Al. And so they begin to build, and they cancel having dinner. And Bill is sort of like, well, maybe we're not having dinner, but do they need a hand with building the place? And obviously Charlie is so like glad that this is Bill suggesting this himself that he's immediately like, yeah, we could do that. Let's go do that. And that is when they get approached by two more dudes. The first guy, those of you who watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine may recognize as Sully from Brooklyn Nine. He is one of the dopey pair of older male detectives who like barely leave their rolling chairs and is super gross. He comes up and just basically goes off on Hickok about how bad an actor he was when he saw him back in Connecticut. Which, as somebody who lived in Connecticut, I'm like, no shit, really. And at first, when he confronts him and is just like, man, I gotta say, you can't act worth a lick. I thought that was really funny. And obviously Hickok does too, because he sort of good-humoredly is like, well, I guess that's a fair assessment. And chuckles to himself a little bit, as does everyone. But then the guy has to push it a little bit too much and be a little too familiar with him about it. And it's just, guy, you had your little moment, now move along. But he does not. So some other dude steps in and sort of stops him and is like, now you need to go away because he wasn't put on this earth just for you to come over here and run him down. Which in the moment you're like, oh good, somebody's handling this stupid asshole. But then that same guy who got the other dude to go away, then himself starts to come over and like try and talk to Bill in this really familiar fashion. And he talks to him about the fact that that Bill blew some guy's head off. And it's very clear that Bill and Seth share a dislike for the fact that they share a dislike of the discussion of their killing people. They do not appreciate when people point out that they've murdered somebody and talk about it in terms that feel really cavalier or don't respect the fact that that was someone's life and instead focus on how badass it was or what an amazing shot it was. It's dehumanizing to the person that they killed, and they obviously are not viewing it from that like perspective themselves, even though they are willing to take someone's life, because it's disrespectful, and it feels disrespectful to them as people when somebody who's obviously trash like this guy is comes up and acts like they're so great. And I think this is really interesting, compelling character thing. This guy brags about having seen Bill Hickok blow some guy head off, and then he talks about how somebody like tried to play him at cards and he took a leaf out of Bill's book and gouged both the guy's eyes out. Obviously, this dude is bad news, but it's not like he isn't understanding how different he is from these two guys. He seems to think that the only thing that sets them apart is that Bill Hickok has more skill, is better with a gun and a better shot, and that's pretty much all that makes them different. And Bill clearly does not appreciate being lumped in with this kind of human being. Like, I am not your pal. I don't function on I didn't blow that guy's head off just because he was, insulting me or whatever. And this is made very evident from the fact that he just got up and left a card table at which somebody was poking and prodding at him. And I think he prides himself a little bit on his restraint in that respect. So when someone insinuates that he doesn't have that restraint, he finds it really insulting. So yeah, I think this is so interesting, the way that he and Seth have the same sort of attitude. So this dude, finally, they wind up like shoving him off, and it takes a lot to get the guy to finally walk away, basically insulting him. And Seth has to come up and also be like, dude, no. And when the guy walks away, he says something about how, I hope that you get what's coming to you. I hope it's a gut shot and that you die slow. And obviously, this really rattles Bill. I'm interested in that moment. He sits there. So many other characters of his type would have shrugged this off and made it a joke, or at least sort of acted like it did not bother them. Bill doesn't do that. Bill sits there for a second, sort of staring into space, because there's, I think, a big part of him that wonders if that's not exactly what he deserves. Like, this is clearly a dude who has a conscience of some kind. And this man who was so quick to, like, go from worshiping him and admiring him to then being like, yeah, but you're really a piece of shit, I feel like might mirror what's going on in Bill's own head a little bit. And the look that he gets on his face, this actor, like, he really plays that moment well of just being like disturbed in spirit by this whole thing, And he winds up getting up and says that he's going to go play cards and drink whiskey. And I feel for him that there's like this isolation to him, like, I don't know. His character is just really compelling to me, and in a way that characters like his are usually not. And Seth, earlier on in the day, the very same loudmouth drunk that almost beat Bill at that hand, comes over and like tries to sort of poke and prod at Seth, and Seth winds up having to toss the guy out. And the dude lands like, because he literally tosses him. The guy lands like face first in a puddle. And Seth has to be like, you are not welcome back here. This tent is closed to you. I really like that moment because it shows that there's a weird loyalty for Bill in Seth already. And also the fact that Seth is a little bit reactionary. Like, as much as this guy was insulting somebody that you feel like you have become friendly with, that reaction was a teeny tiny bit over the top, Seth. You got a little too mad. Seth has a temper, and I feel like, I don't know, I'm just curious about, because Bill, while they're building, when the first dude comes up and tells him he's bad at acting, Bill turns to Seth and is like, how are you so patient, basically? And I can't help but wonder if maybe Seth isn't as patient as Bill gives him credit for. It's just that nobody has poked Seth in the very specific way that will get him to just kind of lose it. And earlier on in the episode, there's the scene where the Reverend is burying the man that Bill killed, the brother of what's his face, Mason. And the Reverend looks at Seth with this really significant expression as he's reading a part from the Bible about how you have to make peace even with your enemies. And then kind of goes on to sort of preach, as Seth puts it, preach at Seth, in a way that Seth finds really, like, again, probably a little too close to the bone, because it's obvious that Seth has a bit of a conscience the same way that Bill does, where it's not like he necessarily thinks he did the wrong thing, but he's not even totally sure that he did the right thing. And the guy that they just buried, Seth did not kill him. Bill killed him. But Seth backed him up on it. Seth was ready to do what he needed to do. And the Reverend seems to still hold Seth sort of accountable for this. His involvement is implied in that he is at this man's funeral in the first place, right? So at least if that's who I thought it was that they were burying, if I'm incorrect on that, let me know, guys, because they might have been burying somebody else, but that's who I thought it was. And I really like the Reverend. I thought that I would find him really irritating, but he really manages to just shy on this side of innocent, where he's charming and like really weirdly funny in his way, while still being true to, like, obviously what he believes. But having the guts to sort of call Seth out in his sermon is kind of impressive, because I don't feel like a lot of men in his position would have the guts to do that. And he just does fucking dead on eye contact with him. And it's just kind of like, hey, dude, because he obviously thinks that the potential is there for Seth to make it turn around and do better. And I really I don't know, I find something really interesting about him. And when Seth later on says, if you're preaching at me, I don't even remember what the full line is, but he says something about if you're preaching at me, and the Reverend comes back with, if I'm preaching at you, then I'm doing you a disservice. And I liked that sentence a lot, because it felt like he's like, if that's how you feel about me talking to you, then I'm obviously not doing this right, because I believe that I can get through to you. And if I am not getting through to you, that means that I'm underestimating you somehow. So I really thought that interaction was sort of revealing on both their parts. That the Reverend is a little more intelligent than I think anyone is giving him credit for, because he's a man of God, and a lot of people sort of take that as being like simple-minded. And I don't mean simple-minded as in like, having a disability or anything. I mean simple-minded in that everything is very black and white to somebody like that. And it's clear that while in the end, I think when it comes down to it, things probably are pretty black and white for the Reverend, he is willing to accept that the world is not like that. So for him, brass tacks, it is that way. But in the actual functioning of the world, you have to deal with what you actually have. And he is more willing to acknowledge the reality of what he's doing and where he lives and who he's surrounded by, which I think is like the biggest battle, right? So yeah. And, like I said, I'm just really also like because I feel like I've talked about just about everything, and I'm glad that Seth and Saul finally got their lot. It's really sort of hilarious because they want this lot, and we know that they are being completely honest about it. They just want to build a fucking hardware store. That's all they want. They're not asking a lot. But because of their association with Bill, because of the fact that they just became friends with this guy on the random, fucking Al is so paranoid about it that he keeps trying to like stop them. And then when the Bella Union shows up, he thinks they might be the fucking go-between, which makes no sense, Al. Holy shit, dude. And so he starts to want to like make a sort of connection between them. Like he's like doing that kind of, you know, that meme of a woman who's like sort of squinting in thought while a bunch of different equations swirl in the air around her. That's what I feel like Al is doing, except that there's nothing there. It's all invented because he's that paranoid. And he winds up realizing when he finally sits down with Saul and Seth and pushes them about the fact that they need to make a deal that they can't sell anybody from Bella Union their goods if they want the lot. Of course, understandably, Seth sort of like bucks at that and is just like, why not? And Al watches him really closely until finally Seth is like, okay, fine. And that seems to be enough that they would agree, even on those terms, to what Al is saying, that he finally agrees to sort of like relent on it and is like, all right, you can sell goods in the normal course of your business, but you can't have whores, you can't have gambling, you can't have booze. And it's amazing that he thinks that they would be at all interested in setting up something like that. Dude. No, they don't care. Are you kidding me? That's not their thing. Look at these two guys. You think they want that? So yeah, that winds up sort of closing the case on whether or not they're in with Bella Union. But I think he's still pretty suspicious about their relationship with Wild Bill, which, I mean, he looks out the window later and sees Wild Bill helping them to build their hardware store. So again, I understand to a degree why he's like, yeah, but they seem pretty buddy-buddy. But like, people can make friends, Al. Just because you aren't good at making friends doesn't mean that that's something that's beyond the capacity of any other human being. He seems to just really not understand the concept of people connecting on any level other than business and greed. It's really like kind of sad. But yeah, so what I was going to say was I felt like I had sort of covered everything. But I know it's not probably something that's a priority to anybody else, but I really, really want to know what's going to happen to Alma, because she's going to know precisely what happened to her husband. She's not a fucking idiot. She's going to know 100%. And what does she do? What can she do? Nothing, you know, unless she gets his father involved. And I don't see that happening. And also, you know, her being an addict puts her in a pretty vulnerable position. So I don't know. We'll see. But this show's really good. I just want to watch the next one so bad every time I finish an episode. So thank you, Patrick, very much for commissioning this. It's been a lot of fun to talk about. I hope you guys are enjoying my coverage of it. If you're interested in commissioning something, you can go to unspoiledpodcast.com/commission, or commissions, or /shop. Both of those work. And I will be seeing you all next week with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.